I thought I was walking into a rare happy birthday moment. Instead, I walked into a courtroom without a judge. 80 people stood around my childhood kitchen like they had paid for tickets. My father did not hand me a gift. He handed me a binder with my entire life priced out and a DNA result that turned me into a stranger. They gave me 60 minutes to disappear until one person in the crowd stood up and flipped the whole room on its head. My name is Peyton Smith. I am saying that out loud in a room full of half-packed boxes because I need to remind myself that I still exist. I am currently sitting on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio, watching the way the afternoon light hits the dust motes floating above a rug I bought at a discount store 3 days ago. It has been 4 months since the night my life fractured, and for most of that time, I have not said a word to anyone outside of a legal setting. I stayed quiet because silence felt safer. Silence felt like the only way to keep the pieces of myself from drifting too far apart. When you speak, you have to organize your thoughts. And for a long time, my thoughts were nothing but static, but I am realizing now that silence is not safety. Silence is just a way of letting the cement dry around your feet until you are stuck in the spot where they left you. People talk about grief like it is a specific, heavy coat you wear when someone dies. They tell you it comes in waves. They tell you time heals all wounds. But they are talking about the grief of loss, the grief of absence. They do not have a pamphlet for the grief of erasure. The weirdest grief is not losing the people you love. It is losing the story you thought your life was. It is looking back at 30 years of memories, Christmases, graduations, scraped knees, awkward dinners, and realizing that while you were living a family drama, the people raising you were balancing a ledger. You look at a photograph of yourself at 5 years old, and you do not just see a child. You see an investment that did not yield the projected returns. That is a different kind of mourning. It hollows you out. It makes you question not just who they are, but who you are. If my past was a fabrication, then what foundation am I standing on right now? I have unpacked the essentials. I have a coffee maker, a mattress, and enough clothes to get me through a work week at Northline Compliance Partners. But there is one object I cannot seem to take out of the box. Yet I also cannot bring myself to throw it in the dumpster behind the building. It is sitting in the bottom drawer of the only cabinet I have set up. It is a thick, black binder, standard office supply, the kind you buy in bulk for tax season. On the spine, in my father's precise, architectural handwriting, is a label that reads my name. Just that. Peyton. Inside that binder is not a collection of childhood art or report cards. It is a spreadsheet. It is a terrifyingly accurate accounting of every dollar spent on my existence from 1996 to the present day. I keep it in the drawer like a weapon that never stops being loaded. I know exactly where it is at all times. I can feel its weight through the cheap particle board of the cabinet. Sometimes, late at night, when the traffic on the highway outside quiets down, I imagine I can hear the pages turning. It is a manifesto of resentment. It is proof that while I was trying to be a daughter, they were keeping a tab. Every time I asked for lunch money, every time I needed braces, every time they drove me to soccer practice, they were not parenting. They were adding a line item. They were calculating the overhead costs of a bad asset. Next to the binder, on the counter I still have not wiped down, is a bottle of wine. It is a nice bottle, a Cabernet. I bought it on the way to their house that night. I remember standing in the aisle of the liquor store, debating between 2 different vintages, thinking that the $28 bottle showed I was an adult with taste, but the $40 bottle showed gratitude. I went with the $40 bottle. I thought we were celebrating. I thought I was walking into a dinner where we would clink glasses and they would make a stiff, awkward toast to my 30th birthday, and we would go on being the polite, distant family we had always been. I hadn't opened the bottle, not once until tonight. It is not wine to me anymore. It is the timestamp of my life breaking. If I open it, I have to admit that the girl who bought it, that hopeful, naive woman who thought she could buy her parents' affection with a vintage Cabernet, is dead. She died in a kitchen in the suburbs while 80 people watched. So the bottle sits there, gathering dust, A monument to the last hour I was truly oblivious. The DNA result was the headline, of course. That is the part that sounds like a soap opera. That is the part that makes people gasp when I tell them the abridged version of the story. 0% match, a hospital mix-up, a stranger in the bloodline. But the DNA was only the first blow. It was the hammer shattering the glass. The real shock, the thing that actually stopped my heart, was not the biology. It was the cruelty. It was the audience. If they had just wanted to tell me the truth, they could have done it on a Tuesday. They could have sat me down at the kitchen table on a quiet morning and told me that the daughter they raised was not the daughter they birthed. We could have cried. We could have processed it. Even if they wanted to cut me off, even if they wanted to disown me, they could have done it via email. They could have sent a letter, but they did not want to just sever the tie. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to stage a public execution of my character. They invited the neighbors. They invited the church group. They invited extended family members I had not seen in 5 years. They packed that kitchen until the air was hot and thin, and they waited until I walked in the door so they could reveal my illegitimacy like a magician revealing a card. Why? That is the question that keeps me awake in this empty apartment. If I was not their daughter, if I meant nothing to them, why did they need an audience to erase me? You do not throw a parade to take out the trash. You do not rent a crowd to discard a mistake. You only do that if you are afraid. You only do that if you are trying to control the narrative before the victim has a chance to speak. They wanted witnesses. They wanted 80 people to see me as a fraud so that no one would listen to me when I started asking questions. My parents, Dale and Corinne, were never loud people. They were quiet. They were rule-following people. They were the kind of people who ironed their jeans and kept the lawn edged to a mathematical precision. They never made scenes. They never raised their voices in public. That is why I didn't suspect anything. If they were dramatic people, if they were prone to outbursts, I might have been on guard, but their cruelty was efficient. It was bureaucratic. It was cold. I realize now that the coldness was not a personality trait. It was a strategy. They were keeping their distance because they knew, on some level, that I was a temporary line item. They were guarding their hearts, or their wallets, or both. And that night, that birthday party that wasn't a party, was the final board meeting. They had prepared the documents. They had printed the spreadsheets. They had stapled the release forms. They had timed it down to the minute, but they made one mistake, a calculation error in their perfect spreadsheet. They assumed that because I was blindsided, I would be powerless. They assumed that if they hit me hard enough with the shame of being unwanted, I would simply crumble and sign my name and vanish. They assumed the room would be on their side. They did not account for the variable. They did not know that someone else was in that room, someone they had not invited, someone who was not there to eat cake or watch a woman get destroyed. I keep thinking about the moment before I opened the door to that kitchen. I keep replaying the feeling of my hand on the brass knob. I was nervous about small talk. I was worried about whether my dad would criticize my job or whether my mom would comment on my hair. I was worried about normal, 30-year-old disappointed daughter things. I had no idea that on the other side of that wood paneling, my entire history had been dismantled and boxed up, ready to be handed to me like a severance package. The humiliation was not impulsive. That is the thing I have to remember. It takes time to print out 30 years of expenses. It takes time to organize a binder. It takes time to call 80 people and tell them to come over for a surprise. They had been planning this for months, maybe years, while I was calling them to check in, while I was buying them anniversary cards. They were building the case against me. They were constructing the stage where they would end me. But the story did not end the way they thought it would. They thought they were writing a tragedy where I walk off into the dark, weeping and broken. They did not expect the genre to shift. They did not expect the stranger near the doorway. They did not expect the person who stood up, said my name like it actually mattered, and flipped the whole room on its head. I am looking at the binder again. I am not going to open it tonight. I am not going to let Dale's handwriting dictate my worth tonight. But I am not throwing it away, either. I am keeping it. because now I know what it is. It is not just a record of what I cost them, it is evidence. It is the first exhibit in the case I am building against them. They wanted a show. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to make sure everyone knew exactly what I was worth to them, which was nothing. They gave me 60 minutes to disappear. They thought 60 minutes was enough time to crush a person. They were wrong. I am going to finish unpacking this apartment. I am going to figure out how to pay the rent on a single income. I am going to find out who I really am, biologically and legally, and then I am going to go back to that spreadsheet. I am going to audit every single line. I am going to find the lies they hid between the numbers. I walked in thinking I was turning 30. I walked out realizing I had been audited. The afternoon of my 30th birthday did not feel like the prologue to a disaster. It felt like a Tuesday. It felt like the satisfying, heavy exhale that comes after weeks of holding your breath. I was sitting at my desk at Northline Compliance Partners, staring at a monitor that finally showed a completed status on a regulatory audit project that had been eating my life for 2 months. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with that familiar, low-grade vibration that usually gave me a headache by 3 in the afternoon. But today, the sound felt almost peaceful. I had beaten the deadline. I had turned 30. I felt a strange, quiet optimism, the kind that whispers that maybe, finally, your real adult life is about to begin. I thought 30 might be the reset button. I thought the chaotic, scrambling energy of my 20s was officially behind me, replaced by competence and stability. My coworkers had done the requisite office celebration. It was low effort and sweet, exactly the way I liked it. Sheila from Human Resources had walked over with a cupcake from the grocery store bakery, the kind with an inch of neon white frosting and a plastic ring stuck in the middle. A few people clapped. Someone made a joke about my insurance rates going down. I ate the cupcake at my desk while archiving files, wiping sugar crumbs off my keyboard. It was mundane. It was safe. It was the last normal hour of my life, though I did not know that yet. I looked at the plastic ring on my desk and threw it in the trash, thinking about how I needed to buy real furniture, how I needed to start dating people who owned bed frames, how I was going to be better. At 5 o'clock, I packed up my bag. The plan for the evening was simple, or so I thought. Dinner at my parents' house, just the 3 of us. It was a tradition that had survived my college years and my 20s, mostly because I insisted on maintaining it. My relationship with Dale and Corinne was not warm, but it was structured. We did birthdays, we did Thanksgiving, we did Christmas Eve. We followed the script. I pulled my phone out to text my mother before I left the parking lot. I typed out a message asking if she needed me to pick up anything on the way. Ice, a specific type of dessert. I waited for the 3 dots to appear. Watching the screen, Corinne was not a texter. She used technology with a suspicious reluctance, as if the phone might bite her if she held it too long. Her reply came through a minute later. Brief and punctuation-free. Just come. That was it. No emoji, no exclamation point, no happy birthday, just a command. I stared at the 2 words, trying to read a tone into them. Was she stressed? Was she cooking something complicated? I told myself I was overanalyzing. That was the dynamic we had. I spent my energy trying to be the warm, easygoing daughter, and they spent their energy being the stoic, immovable parents. I replied with a quick affirmative and threw the phone onto the passenger seat of my car. The drive from the city to the suburbs where I grew up usually took 40 minutes. That afternoon, the traffic was light. I rolled the windows down, letting the late spring air whip through the car. I turned the radio up, singing along to a song I did not particularly like just because I could. I felt good. I felt successful. I had a job, a car, and a plan. I stopped at a wine shop near the highway exit, the one with the nice wood shelving and the staff who wore aprons. I spent 10 minutes debating between bottles, wanting to bring something that would impress Dale. He was a man who appreciated quality but hated extravagance. It was a difficult needle to thread. I settled on a $40 Cabernet. Holding the heavy glass bottle like a peace offering, I thought that maybe tonight, over a good glass of wine, the stiffness between us might finally melt a little. Maybe 30 was the age where they would stop looking at me like a project they were managing and start looking at me like a person. I got back in the car and rehearsed the conversation in my head as I navigated the winding, tree-lined streets of their neighborhood. This was a habit I had never been able to break. Before every visit, I prepared a mental list of safe topics. Talk about the car. Dale liked hearing that I was changing the oil on time. Talk about the weather. Corinne had strong opinions about the humidity. Do not talk about politics. Do not talk about my love life, or lack thereof. Do not talk about the time I wanted to go to art school. Keep it surface level. Keep it pleasant. I practiced my answers to questions they had not asked yet. Yes, the job is stable. No, I am not looking to move. Yes, I am saving money. I turned the corner onto their street. Hickory Lane. It was a quiet street. The kind of street where people find you if your mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. The lawns were manicured within an inch of their lives. It was usually empty, just a row of closed garage doors and silence. But as I straightened the wheel, I hit the brakes. My heart did a strange, violent flip in my chest. There were cars. Not just one or two cars in the driveway. The street was lined with them. They were parked bumper to bumper along both curbs, stretching from my parents' mailbox all the way down to the cul-de-sac. I slowly rolled my car forward, my brain trying to make sense of the visual data. These were not the cars of my parents' friends, because my parents did not have friends. They had acquaintances. They had neighbors they waved to. They did not have dinner parties. They certainly did not have gatherings that required overflow parking. I scanned the vehicles. A muddy pickup truck. A sleek silver luxury sedan. A rusted minivan with a stick figure family on the back window. An unfamiliar SUV with a bumper sticker for a politician my father despised. None of this made sense. My first thought, the only logical thought that could penetrate the confusion, was that something terrible had happened. Emergency. That word flashed in my mind like a neon sign. Dad. Dale must have collapsed. A heart attack. A stroke. That was why there were so many people. The paramedics. The neighbors rushing over to help. The extended family gathering for a crisis. Panic surged up my throat. Acidic and sharp. My parents were sit-in-silence people. They were read-the-paper-in-separate-rooms people. They did not throw parties. If there was a crowd at the Smith house, it meant tragedy. I pulled into the driveway, maneuvering around a beige sedan I did not recognize. I parked haphazardly, not caring that I was blocking the walkway. I grabbed the wine bottle, not because I wanted it, but because my hands needed to hold something solid. I ran toward the garage keypad, my fingers trembling as I punched in the code. I expected to hear sirens. I expected to see an ambulance backing in, but there was only the mechanical whir of the garage door rising, revealing the dark, concrete interior. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me instantly. Motor oil, old cardboard, and the faint, chemical scent of fertilizer. It was the smell of my childhood. It was the smell of my father's workbench, where every tool was outlined in pegboard marker so he would know if I moved anything. It was a smell that usually made me feel tense, but in that moment, it felt like the last safe breath of air on earth. It was familiar. It was private. I stood there for a second, surrounded by the lawnmower and the stacks of recycling bins, trying to steady my breathing. There was no screaming. That was the first thing I noticed. If Dale was dead on the kitchen floor, there would be chaos. There would be sobbing. But the house was quiet. Not empty quiet, but a heavy, pressurized quiet. The kind of silence that has weight. I walked to the interior door that led into the kitchen. It had a small window at the top, covered by a sheer lace curtain that Corinne had hung up 20 years ago. I pressed my face close to the glass, trying to see through the mesh. The kitchen was full. I saw silhouettes, dozens of them, shoulders, backs of heads, arms crossed over chests. The room was packed tight, shoulder to shoulder, but they were not moving. It was not a party. At a party, people circulate. They hold drinks. They lean in to talk. These people were standing still, facing inward, like they were waiting for a performance to begin. The stillness was unnatural. It made the hair on the arms stand up. It looked less like a celebration and more like a congregation waiting for a sermon, or a jury waiting for a verdict. I stepped back from the door, my grip on the wine bottle tightening until my knuckles turned white. I felt a wave of foolishness wash over me. A surprise party. Was that it? Had I misjudged them completely? Maybe this was their way of showing affection. Maybe they had invited everyone I had ever known to shout, "Surprise!" and hand me a cake. The thought felt ridiculous even as I thought it. But I clung to it. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to be the cynical daughter who underestimated her parents' capacity for joy. I wanted to walk in there and feel guilty for assuming the worst. I adjusted the bottle in my hand, wiping my sweaty palm on my slacks. I forced a smile onto my face, a mask of surprised gratitude, just in case. I reached for the doorknob. My hand hovered over the cold brass. From inside the kitchen, I heard a sound. It was a laugh, just one. It was short, high-pitched, and nervous. It sounded like the kind of laugh that escapes someone when they are uncomfortable, a release of tension that is immediately stifled. Heh. And then, silence again. Absolute, total silence. It was as if someone had hit the pause button on the entire world. No clinking of glasses, no murmur of conversation, just the sound of 80 people breathing on the other side of a wooden door, waiting for me to turn the handle. I stood there in the garage, the smell of oil in my nose, the heavy wine bottle in my hand, and the sinking, terrible realization that I was not walking into a party. I was walking into a trap. But I turned the knob anyway. I pushed the door open, and I stepped from the safety of the garage into the blinding light of the kitchen. The door swung open, and the first thing that hit me was the heat. It was a physical wall of warmth generated by too many bodies packed into a space designed for a family of 4. I stepped across the threshold, the smile I had plastered onto my face dying instantly, freezing into a grotesque grimace of confusion. I had expected a kitchen table. I had expected my parents. Maybe, in my wildest, most optimistic delusions, I had expected a handful of balloons and a cake. What I found was a sea of people. They were everywhere. They filled the kitchen, spilling over into the breakfast nook and crowding into the sunken living room beyond. I blinked, my brain stuttering as it tried to process the visual data. There were nearly 80 people standing in my childhood home. I recognized faces in a chaotic, disjointed slideshow. There was Mrs. Higgins from the church choir, clutching her purse like a shield. There was my Uncle Gary, wearing a polo shirt that looked too tight, staring at a spot on the wall just above my head. There were neighbors I had not spoken to since I was 12 years old. There were people from my father's Rotary Club. It was a kaleidoscope of my past, all gathered in one room, standing shoulder to shoulder in a terrifying, suffocating silence. No one cheered. No one shouted surprise. No one started singing. If you have ever walked into a room where people are waiting for bad news, you know the atmosphere. It is heavy. It is thick. But this was worse. This was not the heaviness of tragedy. It was the heaviness of judgment. They were not positioned like guests at a party, holding drinks and chatting in clusters. They were positioned like an audience. They had turned their bodies toward the door I had just entered, forming a semicircle of silent, staring eyes. I felt like an actor who had walked onto the wrong stage in the middle of a play I did not know the lines for. "Mom," I said. My voice sounded thin, scratching against the silence. I looked for Corinne. I needed to find her. I needed her to look at me and roll her eyes, to signal that this was some overwhelming joke, some social obligation that had gotten out of hand. I found her standing near the kitchen island, but she was not the hostess. She was not bustling around with trays of hors d'oeuvres. She was standing perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly in front of her waist, squeezing her own fingers until the skin turned white. She was looking down at the granite countertop, refusing to lift her head. She was looking at her hands as if she were waiting for instructions, as if she were a child who had been told to stand in the corner and not move until she was told otherwise. "Mom, what is going on?" I asked again, taking a hesitant step forward. She did not answer. She did not even flinch. It was as if I was a ghost she was trying to ignore. My eyes swept past her to the focal point of the room. My father, Dale. He was standing in front of the brick fireplace in the living room, a position that elevated him slightly above the rest of the crowd. He was not wearing his usual casual Friday attire. He was wearing a suit, not a tuxedo, but a sharp, charcoal business suit, the kind he used to wear for board meetings before he semi-retired. He looked imposing. He looked official. But it was what he was holding that made the blood drain from my face. He was not holding a gift. He was not holding a glass of champagne. In his left hand, he held a thick black binder. In his right hand, he held a large manila envelope. He held them with a strange, formal reverence, like ceremonial objects. He looked like a town crier about to read a proclamation of war, or a lawyer about to deliver a verdict. He was staring directly at me, his face devoid of any fatherly warmth. There was no smile in his eyes. There was only a cold, flat determination. I felt a sudden, primal urge to turn around and run. My body wanted to pivot, bolt through the garage, jump in my car, and drive until the gas tank was empty, but my feet felt like they had been nailed to the linoleum. The social pressure of 80 pairs of eyes pinned me in place. I could not leave. I was the subject of whatever this was. As I scanned the room, desperate for a friendly face, I saw movement in the back near the hallway that led to the bedrooms. A teenager, my cousin's son. I thought lifted his phone. He did not lift it to check a text. He held it up horizontally. The lens pointed directly at me. I saw the small red dot on the screen indicating that he was recording. My stomach dropped. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Why was he filming? Why would anyone film a person walking into a silent room unless they expected something to happen? Unless they expected a spectacle? The presence of the camera changed the air in the room. It shifted the vibe from awkward to predatory. I was not just being watched. I was being documented. I looked to my left and saw my cousin, Sarah. We used to play Barbies in this living room. We used to sneak wine coolers in the basement. I caught her eye, pleading silently for an explanation. "Peyton," she whispered, but she did not say it like a greeting. She did not say it with excitement. She whispered my name the way you whisper a warning to someone who is about to step on a landmine. It was a sound filled with pity and fear. She quickly looked away, as if making eye contact with me was dangerous, as if my status as a pariah was contagious. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, it felt like hours. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the shallow breathing of the woman standing closest to me. The absurdity of it all began to curdle into panic, and my default defense mechanism kicked in. I tried to be funny. I tried to break the tension with a joke, because that is what you do when you are uncomfortable. You laugh. You try to signal to everyone that it is okay to relax. I shifted the wine bottle in my hand, lifting it slightly. "Wow," I said, my voice shaking more than I intended. Did I miss the memo on the dress code? Or is this an intervention for my coffee addiction? I smiled. It was a brittle, terrified smile. The joke landed like a coin tossed into deep water. There was no splash. There was no ripple. No one laughed. No one even smiled politely. A few people shifted their weight uncomfortably, the sound of shoes scuffing on the floor echoing loudly in the stillness. My attempt at levity only served to highlight how serious the situation was. It was like cracking a joke at a funeral before the casket had been lowered. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, and terrifyingly deliberate. Then, my father spoke. "Sit down, Peyton." He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. He spoke with the calm, flat authority of a manager calling an underperforming employee into a glass-walled office. It was a command, not a request. He gestured with the hand holding the manila envelope toward a single wooden chair that had been placed in the center of the room. Facing the fireplace, the chair was isolated. It was set apart from the rest of the furniture. which had been pushed back against the walls to make room for the crowd. It looked like an interrogation chair. "Dad, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper now. "Why are all these people here?" "Sit down," he repeated. He did not offer an explanation. He simply waited. The crowd seemed to lean in. They were waiting for me to comply. I felt the weight of their collective expectation pressing down on my shoulders. I was trapped. If I ran now, I would look guilty of whatever crime they had already convicted me of in their minds. If I stayed, I was walking into the line of fire. I walked toward the chair. My legs felt numb, like I was wading through molasses. I sat down. The wood was hard and cold against my legs. I placed the wine bottle on the floor next to me. Because I did not know what else to do with it, it looked ridiculous there, a festive object in a room that had been stripped of all joy. From my seated position, the room looked even more intimidating. I was lower than everyone else now. I was physically diminished. I looked up at my father, who loomed by the fireplace, the binder tucked under his arm like a ledger of sins. But as I looked past him, scanning the periphery of the room, my eyes snagged on someone standing near the doorway to the dining room. It was a person I did not recognize. In a room full of suburban casual wear jeans, floral blouses, polo shirts, windbreakers, this person stood out like a splash of ink on a white page. They were wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than my car. They were holding a slim leather briefcase. They were not looking at my father. They were not looking at the floor. They were looking directly at me. Their expression was unreadable. It was not hostile, like my father's. It was not pitying, like my cousin's. It was composed, alert. They stood with a stillness that was different from the frozen awkwardness of the guests. It was the stillness of a predator waiting in the tall grass. Or perhaps a bodyguard waiting for a threat. They were not participating in the collective holding of breath. They were observing. I stared at the stranger for a second. Confusion warring with fear. Who brings a lawyer or a banker or an agent to a birthday party? Why were they standing so far back, separated from the herd? The stranger met my gaze and gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a greeting, it was an acknowledgement. Then my father cleared his throat, a sharp, dry sound that snapped my attention back to the fireplace. He opened the black binder. The snap of the 3 metal rings opening echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. "We are here today," my father began, addressing the room but looking at me, "because we believe in truth, and for 30 years we have been living a lie." He looked at the crowd, ensuring he had their full attention. Then he looked back down at me. "And it is time to correct the record," he said. I sat there, gripping the edges of the wooden chair, surrounded by 80 witnesses, and felt the floor drop out from under the world. My father walked away from the fireplace and crossed the few feet of distance between us. He moved with a stiff, rhythmic gait, the sound of his dress shoes clicking against the hardwood floor echoing in the silence. He stopped directly in front of my chair. He did not look me in the eye. He looked at the binder in his hands, then extended it toward me. "Take it," he said. It was not a request. It was an instruction. I reached out, my hands trembling so violently that I almost dropped it. The binder was heavy, much heavier than a collection of papers should be. It felt dense, like a brick. The black plastic cover was cold to the touch. I rested it on my knees, my fingers hovering over the edge. "Open it," he said. I flipped the cover open. There was no title page with a heart or a sentimental photo. There was a spreadsheet. It was printed in landscape mode. The font small and precise, likely Arial size 10. The header at the top of the page was bolded and underlined. Peyton S., Cost Summary, 1996 to 2026. I stared at the words, my brain refusing to comprehend what I was seeing. A cost summary, like a quarterly report for a failing department, like a budget analysis for a construction project. I looked down the first column. It was a list of dates. I looked at the second column. It was a description of expenses. October 4th, 1996. Hospital delivery fees and postnatal care, $2,400. November 12th, 1996. Formula and diaper supply, $150. January, 1997. Pediatric checkup and vaccination series, $75. I turned the page, my breath catching in my throat. It went on. It went on for pages. August, 2004. Orthodontics down payment, $1,200. July, 2008. Summer camp, Camp Clear Lake, $850. September, 2010. Piano lessons, Mrs. Gable, $40 per week. I remembered Mrs. Gable. I remembered sitting on her piano bench, crying because I could not get my fingers to stretch across the octave, and my mother telling me that I had to stick with it because they had already paid for the semester. I had thought she was teaching me a lesson about perseverance. I realize now she was just worried about the return on investment. My eyes scanned down the rows. It was exhaustive. It was terrifying. They had logged everything. The prom dress I bought at the mall for $180, the tutoring sessions for 11th grade chemistry, the application fees for colleges, the deposit for my freshman dorm room, even the birthday checks were listed, not as gifts, but as outgoing cash flow. November 15th, 2015, birthday gratuity, $50. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. This was not something you put together in a weekend. You cannot reconstruct a list like this from memory. This was a document that had been maintained. It had been updated for 30 years. Every time they handed me a $20 bill to go to the movies with my friends, they had gone home and entered it into a spreadsheet. Every time I hugged them and thanked them for a new pair of sneakers, they were logging the tax. I looked up at Dale. He was watching me read. His face was impassive, like an auditor watching a client realize they are bankrupt. He pointed a finger at the bottom right corner of the final page. "Look at the total," he said. I looked. The number was bolded. It was a six-figure sum, $342,891.14. "We have been generous," Dale said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Generous. He said it the way a bank manager speaks to a loan applicant who has defaulted. He said it as if I were a bad stock they had held on to for too long, hoping the market would turn, and finally deciding to cut their losses. I looked at the crowd. I saw Mrs. Higgins craning her neck to see the paper. I saw my Uncle Gary looking at the floor, his face red. They were witnessing this. They were watching my father present me with a bill for my existence. "This is not," I started to say, but my voice broke. I did not even know how to finish the sentence. "This is not love. This is not normal. This is insane." Dale did not wait for me to finish. He turned back to the fireplace and picked up the manila envelope. He held it up for the room to see. "The money is one thing," he said, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "We absorbed the cost because we are decent people. We provided a home. We provided education. We provided food. We did what was expected of us." He paused for effect. The silence in the room was absolute. "But we did it under false pretenses," he said. He opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It looked clinical. It had a hospital logo at the top and a series of bar graphs and percentages in the center. "We had our suspicions," Dale said. "You never looked like us. You never acted like us. So, 6 weeks ago, we ran a test, a comprehensive DNA panel." He turned the paper around so I could see it. He did not hand it to me. He held it just out of reach, like evidence I was not allowed to contaminate. 0%, he said. The number hit me harder than the binder. 0, not a partial match, not a distant relation. 0, there was a hospital mix-up, he said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. "We have already contacted the administration at St. Jude's 30 years ago. There was a switch in the nursery. We do not know where our biological daughter is, but we know, for a fact, that she is not sitting in this chair." A gasp rippled through the room. It was the first genuine sound the audience had made. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." The camera phone I had seen earlier dipped slightly, then steadied. Zooming in on my face, I looked at Corinne. Please, I thought, please say something. Please tell him this is cruel. Please tell him that 30 years of being a mother counts for more than a saliva swab. Corinne finally looked up from her hands. Her eyes met mine, and they were empty. There was no warmth. There was no conflict. There was only a profound, exhausted irritation. "We cannot keep pretending," she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silent kitchen, it sounded like a scream. It was not a sentence spoken out of grief. It was procedural. It was the voice of a woman who was tired of keeping a secret and just wanted the file closed. Dale nodded at her, confirming her statement. He turned back to the crowd. "We raised someone else's child," he announced. He said it with a victim's righteousness. He stripped me of my identity in 5 words. I was no longer Peyton, the girl who mowed their lawn and got straight A's. I was someone else's child. I was an intruder. I was a cuckoo bird in their nest, eating their food and taking up their space. He made me sound like a mistake they had tolerated, a parasite they had finally found the courage to remove. He reached into the manila envelope again and pulled out a second document. This one was stapled. It had a blue legal backing. He placed it on top of the binder that was still resting on my knees. He pulled a pen from his suit pocket and clicked it. "This is an acknowledgement and release," he said. He placed the pen on top of the paper. "It states that you have been informed of the lack of biological relation. It states that you acknowledge the termination of any familial financial obligations. It waives your right to claim any future support or inheritance from the Smith estate." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. "Sign it," he said. I looked at the document. The text was dense, clause after clause of legal jargon. I saw words like indemnity, forfeiture, and severance. I looked around the room. I saw faces watching me with a mixture of horror and fascination. No one moved to help me. No one said, "She needs a lawyer." No one said, "Give her a minute." They just watched. I cannot sign this right now." I stammered, "I need to read it. I need to think." "You do not have time to think," Dale said. He checked his watch. He tapped the glass face of it with his index finger. "We have been patient for 30 years. Our patience has expired." He stood up straight and looked down at me with pure disdain. "You have 1 hour," he said. 1 hour, I whispered. 1 hour to vacate the premises. He said, "The locks will be changed at 7 o'clock. He pointed toward the door that led to the garage. "Your things are packed," he said. I followed his finger. Sitting near the door, slumped against the wall, was a bag. It was not a suitcase. It was not a set of luggage. It was my old high school duffel bag, the purple one with the fraying strap and the Northline High mascot peeling off the side. It was the bag I used to use for gym class. It was the bag I threw my sweaty socks in. They had stuffed 30 years of my life into a gym bag. The sight of it broke something inside me that the spreadsheet had not. The spreadsheet was cruel, but the bag was dismissive. The bag said that I was not worth a cardboard box. The bag said that I was trash to be hauled to the curb. Dale looked at me, then looked at the pen. "Sign the paper. Peyton," he said, "and then take your bag and go. You are done here." The pen in my hand felt like a burning coal. I stared at the signature line on the document, the black ink of the X, marking the spot where I was supposed to sign away my existence. The paper was bright white, blinding under the recessed kitchen lighting. The words acknowledgement and release seemed to vibrate, blurring in and out of focus. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm that made it hard to breathe. I could feel the eyes of 80 people drilling into the back of my neck. They were waiting for the capitulation. They were waiting for the moment the unwanted daughter accepted her fate, signed the paper, and dragged her gym bag out into the night. Dale was looming over me, his watch ticking away the seconds of my 1-hour deadline. He looked triumphant. He looked like a man who had successfully excised a tumor and was just waiting to stitch up the wound. I tightened my grip on the pen. I was going to do it. I was going to sign. Not because I agreed with them, and not because I believed I was worthless, but because I just wanted the air to move again. I wanted to escape the suffocating weight of their judgment. I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper. I would strongly advise against that. The voice cut through the room like a scalpel. It was not loud, but it was projected with such precise, calm authority that it silenced the hum of the refrigerator. It was a voice that did not ask for permission to speak. It was a voice that assumed the floor belonged to it. I froze. The pen hovered millimeters above the paper. Dale's head snapped up. He looked toward the dining room archway, his eyes narrowing in confusion. The stranger I had noticed earlier, the one in the tailored navy suit who had been watching from the perimeter, stepped forward. They moved with a fluid, deliberate confidence, navigating through the crowd of frozen neighbors and relatives. People parted automatically, sensing that this person was not part of the herd. This person was a wolf. "Excuse me," Dale said, his voice losing a fraction of its command. "This is a private family matter." The stranger did not stop until they were standing in the center of the room. Forming a triangle with me and my father, up close, the stranger was even more intimidating. They were ageless, with sharp features and eyes that looked like they missed nothing. They held the leather briefcase not as an accessory, but as a shield. "My name is Avery Kincaid," the stranger said. The name was spoken clearly, ensuring everyone from the kitchen island to the back of the living room heard it. "I am a senior trust officer at Briarwell Fiduciary." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Briarwell Fiduciary. Even in a middle-class suburb, the name carried weight. It sounded like old money. It sounded like mahogany desks and silence. It sounded like power. Dale went rigid. His posture, which had been aggressive and leaning forward, suddenly snapped back. He stood straighter, but it was a defensive stiffness. I saw a flicker of something pass behind his eyes. It was not anger, it was recognition, and beneath the recognition, there was fear. "I do not know who you are," Dale said, but the lie was thin. "And you are trespassing." "I am not trespassing," Avery replied calmly. "I am here for an appointment." "I did not schedule an appointment with you," Dale snapped. "I did not say the appointment was with you." "Mr. Smith," Avery said. They turned their heads slightly, locking eyes with me. "I am here for Peyton." I blinked, confusion washing over me. I had never heard of Briarwell Fiduciary. I had never scheduled anything with a trust officer. I could barely afford my car insurance. I certainly did not have a trust. I don't," I stammered. "The appointment was scheduled weeks ago," Avery continued, their voice smooth and unbothered by my confusion. "It was triggered automatically by the date. Today is your 30th birthday. Is it not?" "Yes," I whispered. "Then I am right on time," Avery said. Avery turned back to Dale, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The politeness in Avery's demeanor evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp professionalism. "Mr. Smith, I am witnessing you demand a signature on a legal release form from a distressed party in front of a hostile crowd of 80 witnesses," Avery said. "You have set a time limit. You have threatened immediate eviction. You have created an environment of extreme psychological pressure." Avery paused, letting the words sink in. "In a court of law," Avery said, enunciating every syllable, "that is the textbook definition of coercion. If she signs that document right now, not only will it be voidable, but you will have opened yourself up to significant liability." Dale laughed. It was a bark of a laugh, forced and hollow. He waved his hand dismissively, but I noticed his fingers were trembling. "This is ridiculous," Dale said, addressing the crowd now, trying to win them back. "This is just some ambulance chaser Peyton hired to cause a scene. She is trying to extort us after we supported her for 30 years. "I have never met Peyton before this moment," Avery said. "I was not hired by her. I was hired by the grantor." "Grantor, Mrs." Higgins whispered from the front row. The crowd was leaning in now. The dynamic had shifted. This was no longer a public shaming. It was a drama, and the plot had just twisted. Avery set the briefcase down on the kitchen table, pushing aside a bowl of untouched potato salad. The click of the latches opening was the loudest sound in the world. Avery pulled out a document. It was thick, bound in blue, and looked far more official than the spreadsheet my father had printed out. "There is a trust," Avery announced. The words hung in the air. A trust. "It was established 30 years ago," Avery continued. "It has been managed by Briarwell Fiduciary under a blind agreement. The terms state that the beneficiary is to gain full access and control upon their 30th birthday." Avery looked at me. "The trust names you, Peyton, directly, not your parents, not the people who raised you. You—" My mouth fell open. "A trust. For me." Dale lunged forward a step, his face turning a blotchy red. "That is irrelevant. She is not our blood. The DNA proves it. She has no claim to this family or any assets connected to it." "That is the interesting part," Avery said, flipping a page in the document. "The trust is not connected to the Smith family assets. It is an independent instrument, and the release you are trying to force her to sign, I notice the language is incredibly broad. It waives her rights to any and all claims, assets, or transfers connected to her identity or guardianship." Avery looked at Dale with a look of withering scrutiny. "If she signs that release, she effectively renounces her claim to the trust before she even knows it exists," Avery said. "That is why we are here." The room erupted into whispers. The narrative Dale had built, the narrative of the generous parents cutting off the leech, was crumbling. Now, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a heist. "You are lying," Dale spat. "There is no trust. You are making this up." "Am I?" Avery asked. "Then why did we receive a notarized request 3 weeks ago attempting to change the correspondence address for the trust?" Avery held up a piece of paper. Briarwell Fiduciary flagged the request as suspicious because the signature did not match the beneficiaries on file. We attempted to contact Peyton at her registered address, but our letters were returned. Someone was intercepting the mail. Avery turned to Corinne. My mother was still standing by the island, but she was no longer looking at her hands. She was looking at Dale with wide, terrified eyes. She looked like a deer in headlights. She looked guilty. "Mrs. Smith," Avery said softly, "did you know about the address change?" Corinne flinched physically, as if she had been slapped. Her composure, usually so ironclad, cracked. She let out a small, strangled sound and looked at the floor as if she wished it would open up and swallow her whole. She did not say no. She did not defend herself. She just crumbled. That was the answer. I looked at my father. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the binder on my lap, the cost summary. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The spreadsheet, the 60-minute deadline, the public humiliation. It wasn't just about hurting me. It wasn't just about kicking me out. It was a distraction. They knew. They knew about the trust. They knew it unlocked today. They knew that if I found out about it, I would have resources. I would have power. They needed me to sign that release before I met with anyone from Briarwell. They needed me to sign away my rights while I was too broken and ashamed to read the fine print. "You knew," I whispered. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I looked at Dale. He was sweating now. The beads of perspiration were visible on his forehead. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the desperate, cornered look of a man whose scheme has just been exposed in front of the entire neighborhood. "You knew I had money coming," I said, my voice rising. "You presented me with a bill for $300,000, knowing I had a trust fund that you were trying to steal." "It is compensation," Dale shouted, losing control. "For the years we wasted, for the fraud, we raised a stranger, we deserve that money." The room gasped. He had admitted it. He had admitted that it was about the money. Avery stepped between me and Dale. It was a subtle move, but it created a physical barrier. Avery turned to me. The expression on their face was serious, urgent, and intensely focused. "Peyton," Avery said. I looked at this stranger who had just saved my life. "Do not sign anything here," Avery said. Do not sign the release. Do not sign a receipt. Do not sign a napkin. Avery reached into their pocket and pulled out a business card. They pressed it into my hand. My fingers closed around the card, feeling the sharp edges of the cardstock. Grab your bag, Avery said. Leave this house, go to a safe place, and call me, tonight. I looked at the pen still sitting on the table. I looked at the release form. I looked at the binder full of my costs. I dropped the binder on the floor. It hit with a heavy, satisfying thud. I looked at Dale one last time. He was breathing hard, staring at Avery with hatred. He looked smaller than he had 5 minutes ago. He looked like a thief who had been caught with his hand in the jar. I am leaving, I said. I bent down and picked up my gym bag. I did not say goodbye. I did not look at Corinne. I turned my back on them. I turned my back on the 80 people staring in stunned silence, and I walked toward the garage door, clutching Avery's business card like it was a lifeline to a new world. I bent down and grabbed the handle of the purple gym bag. The fabric was rough against my palm, a tactile reminder of high school locker rooms and forgotten sweat socks. As I straightened up, my eyes fell on the black binder I had dropped on the floor moments before, the cost summary, the ledger of my existence. I could have left it there. I could have walked out and left the evidence of their cruelty rotting on their kitchen floor, but a cold, sharp instinct flared in my chest. That binder was not just a prop for my father's performance. It was data. It was a confession written in Excel. I reached out and snatched the binder from the floor. With my other hand, I swept the unsigned release form and the hospital DNA report off the table, crumpling them into the front pocket of the duffel bag. I did not look at Dale. I did not look at Corinne. I walked toward the garage door. Moving through the periphery of the crowd, the people I passed, neighbors who had waved to me from their driveways for 2 decades, relatives who had sent me graduation cards with $20 bills inside, felt suddenly alien. They were not people anymore. They were statues. They were cardboard cutouts with painted-on expressions of shock and pity. I saw Mrs. Higgins clutch her purse tighter as I passed, as if my misfortune might be contagious. I saw my cousin Sarah look down at her shoes, unable to witness the shame of my exit. I stepped into the garage, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind me, sealing off the air-conditioned silence of the house. The humid evening air hit me, thick with the smell of cut grass and impending rain. I walked to my car, threw the bag and the binder into the passenger seat, and keyed the ignition. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 2 tries to get the key into the slot. I backed out of the driveway, maneuvering around the obstacle course of visitors' cars. I did not look back at the house. I did not check the rearview mirror to see if my parents were watching from the window. I just drove. I drove without a destination. I drove until the manicured lawns of the suburbs gave way to the strip malls and gas stations of the highway corridor. I drove until the streetlights blurred into long streaks of orange and white. My brain was offline. I was operating on autopilot, my body performing the mechanical actions of steering and braking while my mind floated somewhere above the roof of the car. Numb and detached, I ended up at a diner called the Midway, about 40 minutes outside of town. It was one of those 24-hour places that exist outside of normal time, a beacon of neon and grease located just off the interstate exit. I parked under the flickering buzz of a street lamp and sat there for a long time, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Inside, the diner was mostly empty. A trucker sat at the counter nursing a slice of pie, and a couple of teenagers were huddled in a booth in the corner. I slid into a booth near the window. The vinyl seat was cracked and taped over with silver duct tape that snagged on my jeans. The table was sticky, no matter how many times they wiped it. It would always be sticky. It was a layer of permanent, polymerized syrup. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda drifted over. "Coffee?" she asked. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask why I was wearing office clothes at 9 o'clock at night with a face that probably looked like a shattered windshield. "Yes," I said. "Black, please." She poured it into a thick beige mug. The steam rose up, smelling of burnt beans and chicory, The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. It was ugly. It was gritty. It was the most honest place I had been in all day. I reached into the gym bag and pulled out the crumpled papers I had swiped from the table. I smoothed out the acknowledgement and release form, pressing it flat against the sticky tabletop. Under the harsh light, I finally read it. Really read it. Dale had told the room it was about ending financial support. He had framed it as a severance package for a leech. But as I parsed the legal jargon, my stomach tightened. The language was specific, terrifyingly specific. Clause 4, Section B. The undersigned hereby waives any and all rights to pursue legal action regarding the methodology, acquisition, or disclosure of genetic testing results. Clause 5. The undersigned agrees to a permanent non-disclosure agreement regarding the circumstances of their placement within the household. It wasn't just a breakup letter, it was a gag order. They weren't just trying to kick me out. They were trying to bury the body. They wanted to make sure that once I walked out that door, I could never ask how the switch happened. They wanted to make sure I could never sue the hospital, never question the timeline, and never look for the truth. They wanted to buy my silence with the threat of homelessness. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the form. I stared at the screen. It was a text from a number I did not have saved, but I knew immediately who it was. They are trying to outrun something. Do not let them. Avery Kincaid, the stranger with the briefcase, the person who had thrown a wrench into my parents' perfectly calibrated machine. I read the text 3 times. They are trying to outrun something. I looked at the release form again. Dale had been so desperate for me to sign it. He had given me an hour. Why the rush? If the trust didn't vest until midnight, why did he need my signature at 7:30? Because he was terrified. I pushed the paper aside and pulled the gym bag onto the seat next to me. I unzipped it fully. I wanted to see what they had packed. I wanted to see what they thought my life amounted to. It was mostly junk. Old t-shirts I hadn't worn since college. A pair of worn-out sneakers. A stack of paperback books I had left in my old bedroom. It was a performance of packing, not actual packing. They had just grabbed whatever was visible to make the bag look full. But at the bottom, underneath a tangled power strip, my fingers brushed against something stiff. It wasn't fabric. It was a file folder. I pulled it out. It was a standard manila folder, unlabeled. I opened it. Inside were papers that looked old-yellowed at the edges. Smelling of musty attic air, the first document was a carbon copy of a records request form. It was dated October 14th, 1996, 2 weeks after I was born. The request was for incident reports from the maternity ward. The second document was a handwritten note on a piece of stationery from a hotel in downtown Columbus. The handwriting was my mother's, but it was shaky, jagged. It read, Saint. Jude says no record of transfer. Try Mercy General. I froze. Saint. Jude's was where I was born. That was the story. That was always the story. Why was she writing about Mercy General? And why was this dated 1996? Dale had told the crowd they ran the DNA test 6 weeks ago. He said they had suspicions, but this note was from 30 years ago. They didn't just have suspicions. They knew. They had been investigating this since I was in diapers. I dug deeper into the pocket of the bag. There was a folded white envelope, sealed but crumpled, as if it had been shoved in hastily. It looked like it had been scooped up from a desk drawer in a hurry, perhaps when they were clearing out my file to pretend I never existed. I tore it open. It wasn't a letter. It was a receipt from a private investigator named Harlan Groff, dated 2001. The service description read, Surveillance of subject family Whitaker, no contact made. Whitaker. The name meant nothing to me, but seeing it typed out on an invoice from 25 years ago made the breath catch in my throat. My parents had been watching another family. They had been paying a private investigator to watch a family named Whitaker while I was learning to tie my shoes. I leaned back against the cracked vinyl booth. The diner blurred for a second. The waitress poured more coffee into my cup. But I didn't hear her approach. They knew. They had always known. The DNA test wasn't a revelation. It was a prop. The party wasn't a celebration. It was a preemptive strike. They knew the trust was coming due, and they knew that if I had the money and the freedom, I might start asking questions they didn't want to answer. So they tried to break me first. I needed to call work. The thought popped into my head with absurd clarity. I was scheduled to present a compliance update at 10 o'clock the next morning. It seemed so small, so insignificant, but it was the only tether I had left to the normal world. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady now. Not calm, but steady with the kind of cold focus that comes after the panic burns itself out. I dialed the office voicemail line. "Hi, this is Peyton," I said. My voice sounded flat, mechanical. "I won't be in tomorrow. I have a family emergency." I hung up. A family emergency. It was the truest lie I had ever told. As soon as I set the phone down, a notification popped up, a voicemail. It had come in 10 minutes ago while I was driving. Bypassing the ringer, it was from a number with a local area code, but one I didn't recognize. I held the phone to my ear and pressed play. "Ms. Smith," a voice said. It was a man's voice, deep, professional, but with a slight tremor of urgency. "My name is Silas Thorne. I am an attorney representing Victor and Leona Whitaker." I squeezed my eyes shut. Whitaker, the name on the private investigator's receipt. "My clients have been searching for you for a very long time," the voice continued. "They were recently notified of a trust maturation that matches the profile of their missing daughter. They do not want to intrude, but they believe there was a mistake made 30 years ago, a mistake that was concealed. Please call me back when you are safe." The message ended with a click. I lowered the phone. Outside the window, a semi-truck rumbled past, shaking the glass. Victor and Leona Whitaker, my biological parents. They weren't dead. They weren't uninterested. They were searching, and my parents, Dale and Corinne, had known about them. They had watched them, and they had kept me from them. I looked around the diner. The trucker was wiping his mouth with a napkin. The teenagers were laughing at a video on a phone. The world was spinning on, mundane and indifferent, but my world had stopped, and then started spinning in the opposite direction. I understood then why Dale and Corinne had invited the audience. They didn't invite 80 people to share news. They invited 80 people to validate a narrative. They wanted to create a wall of witnesses who would swear that I was the villain, that I was the leech, that I was the one who needed to be cut off. They wanted to shame me into silence so that when the Whitakers finally found me, I would be too broken to listen. They wanted to destroy my credibility before I even knew I had a story to tell. I took a sip of the coffee. It was cold now, and bitter. I drank it anyway. I was not going to sign the release. I was not going to disappear. I was not going to be the broken daughter they wanted me to be. I reached for the binder, the cost summary, and opened it to the first page. I pulled a pen from my purse. I looked at the first item. Hospital delivery fees. I drew a line through it. Then I wrote a note in the margin. Fraud. I closed the binder. The revenge wasn't going to be a screaming match in a kitchen. It wasn't going to be a scene. It was going to be meticulous. It was going to be an audit, and I was going to be the one holding the red pen. I chose the location carefully. I did not want to go to their house, which I assumed was magnificent, and I did not want them coming to my apartment, which was currently a shrine to cardboard boxes and panic. I needed neutral ground. I needed a place where, if the air got too thin to breathe, I could stand up, walk out the door, and disappear into a crowd. So I picked a coffee shop on the north side of town, a place with high ceilings, loud espresso machines, and enough foot traffic to ensure that no one would make a scene. I arrived 15 minutes early. I sat in a booth near the back, facing the door, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking. I watched the door swing open and closed, scanning every face, trying to guess what my biology looked like. I had spent 30 years looking at Dale and Corinne and seeing nothing of myself, not the nose, not the hairline, not the temperament. I had always assumed I was just a recessive anomaly. Now, I knew I was looking for a mirror. When they walked in, I knew it was them instantly. It wasn't just the resemblance, though that was there. It was the way they carried themselves. Victor and Leona Whitaker did not walk like people who were worried about parking meters or grocery bills. They moved with a polished, insulated grace. Victor was tall, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car, and Leona wore a structured coat and a silk scarf that looked like it had been tied by a stylist. They looked wealthy, but not in a flashy, new money way. They looked like private schools and lake weekends wealthy. They looked like the kind of people who had a family crest and a lawyer on retainer for things other than criminal defense. But beneath the polish, they looked terrified. Leona's eyes were scanning the room with a frantic, desperate intensity. When her gaze landed on me, she stopped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Stifling a sound that I knew, even from across the room, was a sob. Victor put a hand on her elbow, steadying her, but I could see his own posture stiffen. He looked at me like I was a ghost that had just materialized through the steam of the latte machine. They walked toward me. Every step they took felt like a drumbeat in my chest. I stood up, not out of respect, but because I felt vulnerable sitting down while they loomed over me. "Peyton," Leona whispered. Her voice was wet and trembling. "Yes," I said. My voice was dry. "Ms. Whitaker." "Leona," she said. "Please, Leona." She looked like she wanted to hug me. Her arms twitched at her sides, a suppressed instinct to reach out and grab the child she had lost. But she saw something in my face, a wall, a warning, a coldness that I couldn't turn off, and she held back. Instead, she just stood there, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, ruining her expensive foundation. Victor stood beside her, his jaw working, his eyes red-rimmed and glassy. They were crying. They were openly weeping in the middle of a coffee shop, and I felt nothing. I waited for the emotional dam to break. I waited for the cinematic moment where I would fall into their arms and feel a sense of belonging that had been missing my entire life. But it didn't happen. I looked at their tears with a detached curiosity. I felt like an anthropologist observing a tribe I didn't belong to. My emotional reserves had been completely tapped out by Dale and Corinne 24 hours ago. I had no tears left to give to strangers, even if those strangers shared my DNA. "Please," Victor said, his voice rough. "Let's sit." We sat. The table was small, forcing an intimacy I wasn't ready for. Leona couldn't take her eyes off me. She was memorizing my face, cataloging the shape of my eyebrows, the curve of my chin. It made me want to crawl out of my skin. "We have been looking for you," Victor said, clearing his throat. "For a long time. But we didn't know. We didn't know where to look until the registry pinged the trust." "The trust," I said. "Avery told me about it. We set it up years ago," Victor said. "Just in case. We didn't know if you were out there. We didn't know if you were safe, but we wanted to make sure that if you ever surfaced, you would be protected." "Why did you think I was out there?" I asked. "Dale said it was a mix-up. He said you didn't know." Leona let out a sharp, pained breath. She reached into her handbag, a leather tote that smelled of expensive perfume, and pulled out a small photo album. It wasn't digital. It was a physical, leather-bound book. She slid it across the table toward me. "We didn't know for a long time," Leona said. "We raised a daughter. Her name was Marin." Marin. The name landed on the table between us like a stone. "She was wonderful," Leona said, her voice breaking. "She was bright and funny, and she loved to paint, but she was sick. She had a congenital condition. It affected her kidneys." I stared at the album. I hadn't opened it yet. "When she was 26, Victor continued, taking over because Leona couldn't speak. "Her condition worsened. We started looking for donor matches. We did the standard compatibility screening. That was when we found out." He paused, looking down at his hands. They were manicured hands, devoid of the calluses my father Dale had. "The doctors told us it was impossible," Victor said. "They told us that genetically, Marin could not be our child. Neither of us. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't a mistake. It was a total lack of biological connection." We didn't care, Leona said fiercely. She was our daughter. We loved her more than anything, but we were confused. We started an inquiry with the hospital. We tried to find out what happened 30 years ago. And Marin? I asked. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the table. She passed away, Leona whispered. 4 months after the test, the condition. It moved too fast. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I opened the photo album. The first picture was of a girl laughing on a sailboat. She had blonde hair, lighter than mine, and she was tan. But the face, I was looking at my own face. It wasn't identical. Environment and nutrition and life choices shape a person, but the architecture was undeniable. She had my chin, the sharp, slightly pointed chin that Corinne used to make fun of. She had my smile shape, the way one corner went up higher than the other. She had my eyes. I was staring at a ghost. I was staring at the girl who had lived the life I was supposed to have. She had gone to private schools. She had sailed on lakes. She had been loved by these two people who were currently weeping across from me, and she was dead. I realized then that I was not just a lost daughter to them. I was a resurrection. I was the second chance they thought they would never get. I am so sorry, I said, and I meant it. I was sorry for their loss. But I also felt a strange, selfish recoil. I didn't want to be Marin. I didn't want to be the consolation prize for a dead girl. We didn't do the switch, Victor said, his voice urgent, intense. You have to know that. Peyton, we would never have given you up. We don't know how it happened. We have attorneys investigating the hospital right now, but we want you to know that you were never unwanted. He leaned forward. We want to help you, he said. We know this is abrupt. We know you have a life here, but we have plenty of room. We have a guest house on the estate. It's private. You could have your own space. We can cover your expenses, anything you need, legal fees, housing, time off work. We want to be there for you. They were offering me the world. Safety, money, a guest house on an estate. It was everything Dale had just stripped away from me, handed back on a silver platter. But it felt like pressure. It felt like a transaction. It felt like they were trying to fast forward through 30 years of bonding by writing a check. They were apologizing the way wealthy people do everything formally, intensely, and with the assumption that resources equal repair. They thought that if they made me comfortable enough, the trauma would dissolve. I have a job, I said, my voice sounding too defensive. I have an apartment. I mean, it's a mess right now, but I have one. Of course, Leona said quickly. We don't want to uproot you. We don't want you to be alone. She reached out and finally touched my hand. Her skin was soft, terrified soft. Did you ever love horses? She asked. The question came out of nowhere. It was breathless, hopeful. I froze. I looked at the photo album again. There was a picture of Marin on a horse, wearing riding gear, holding a blue ribbon. She looked radiant. She looked like she belonged on that horse. I had been terrified of horses since a petting zoo incident when I was 5. I was allergic to hay. I had never been on a horse in my life. No, I said. I tried to say it gently, but it came out blunt. I'm actually allergic. I've never ridden. Leona flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a tiny tightening of her eyes. But I saw it. She was looking for Marin. She was looking for the shared trait, the genetic memory that would prove I was really hers, or really Marin's sister. And I had failed the test. I pulled my hand back. I think I need to go, I said. This is a lot. It's a lot to process. Please, don't go yet, Victor said. We haven't even ordered food. I can't eat, I said. I'm sorry. I need time. I stood up. I felt like I was running away from a rescue boat. But I couldn't help it. I couldn't be collected. I couldn't be the thing that fixed their grief. I was still bleeding from my own wounds. I couldn't bandage theirs. Leona stood up too. She reached into her tote bag again. Wait, she said. Please, just take this. She handed me an envelope. It was thick, made of heavy, cream-colored paper. It was sealed with a wax stamp, an actual wax stamp. On the front, in elegant cursive, it read, "For her 30th. "We wrote it," Leona said, her voice trembling again. "Last week, before we knew we would find you today, we wrote it for the daughter we hoped was out there. Please, just read it later." I took the envelope. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than paper should be. "Thank you," I said. "I will." I walked out of the coffee shop. I stepped into the cool, gray afternoon, leaving the smell of roasted beans and the sound of weeping behind me. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and tossed the envelope onto the passenger seat next to the gym bag and the binder. I looked at the 3 items: the gym bag full of trash from the parents who threw me away, the binder full of debts from the father who hated me, and the cream-colored envelope from the strangers who wanted to love a ghost. I started the car. I didn't feel lucky. I didn't feel saved. I felt like a puzzle piece that didn't fit in either box. I was too expensive for the Smiths, and I was too alive for the Whitakers. I was something in between, and I had to figure out how to be that person on my own. The offices of Briarwell Fiduciary were designed to make you feel safe, provided you had the net worth to justify the square footage. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and old paper, the kind of silence that usually costs $500 an hour. I walked in wearing the same blazer I had worn to my birthday execution, but I felt different inside it. 2 days ago, I was a daughter trying to please a father who kept a ledger of my existence. Today, I was a client. Avery Kincaid was waiting for me in a conference room that looked over the city skyline. It was a stark contrast to the sticky table at the diner. There were no pitying glances here. There was only a stack of documents 3 inches thick and a carafe of water. Avery did not waste time with pleasantries. They gestured for me to sit and opened the file. "We need to talk about the numbers," Avery said. I braced myself. After Dale's spreadsheet, I was expecting another invoice. I was expecting to hear that I owed taxes, or fees, or that the trust was just a token amount that would barely cover my rent. "The trust is valued at $4,200,000, Avery said. I stopped breathing for a second. The number was so large it sounded abstract. It sounded like monopoly money. "That is the principal," Avery continued, their voice calm and precise. "It has been accruing interest in a conservative growth portfolio for 30 years. The Whitakers funded it shortly after your birth, under the assumption that if their daughter was ever found, she would need independence. $4 million. I looked at my hands. These were the same hands that had clipped coupons for laundry detergent last week. These were the same hands that had shaken while holding a $40 bottle of wine because I was worried about the expense. "And the protections?" I asked, my voice steady, ironclad. Avery said, "That is why your father panicked." Avery slid a piece of paper across the mahogany table. It was a photocopy of a request form, dated 3 weeks prior. It was a change of beneficiary correspondence form. It requested that all access codes, debit cards, and legal notices regarding the trust be sent to a post office box in a town 2 hours away. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It was a forgery of my name. It was a good one Dale had practiced, but the loop on the P was too tight. It was his handwriting trying to wear my skin. We flagged it immediately. Avery explained, "The protocol for this trust requires biometric verification for any address changes within 6 months of the vesting date. When we tried to call you to verify, the number on file had been disconnected." I frowned. My phone had never been disconnected. We dug deeper. Avery said, "Someone called our service center claiming to be you, stating your phone was stolen and providing a new number, a prepaid burner phone. That was where we sent the verification text." I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. It wasn't just a plan to kick me out. It was a heist. Dale and Corinne knew the money was unlocking on my 30th birthday. They knew that if they could get the access codes sent to a P.O. box, they could drain the accounts before I even knew the money existed. The birthday party and the humiliation were just a smokescreen. They needed me to sign that release form so that if I ever did find out about the theft, I would have already waived my right to sue them. They were going to steal $4 million and leave me with a duffel bag of old t-shirts. I need a lawyer. I said, a real one, not a family friend. I need a shark. Avery nodded. I have already taken the liberty of contacting a firm that specializes in trust fraud and identity theft. They are expecting your call. By noon. I was sitting in another office, this one less mahogany and more glass and steel. My attorney was a woman named Elena Vance, a former prosecutor with eyes that looked like they could cut diamonds. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She offered a battle plan. We are going to audit them, Elena said. We are going to audit them back to the Stone Age. We started with the hospital. Elena filed an emergency motion to unseal the administrative records from the night of my birth. We requested chain of custody logs for the DNA test Dale had waved in my face. We subpoenaed the internal incident reports from the maternity ward at St. Jude's. It took 3 days for the first crack to appear. Elena called me into her office and put a document on the screen. Look at the dates. She said, it was a lab report from a genetic testing center. It was a paternity test. The names listed were Dale Smith and Peyton Smith. The result was a 0% match, but it wasn't from 6 weeks ago. It was dated August 12th, 2001. I stared at the date. 2001. I was 5 years old. They knew. I whispered. They didn't just suspect. Elena said, they knew. They ran a test when you were in kindergarten. And look at this one. She swiped to the next image. Another test, dated 2009, when I was 13, and another one, 2015, the week before I left for college. They have been building a file on you for 25 years. Elena said. They weren't surprised by the results. They were monitoring them. They were reconfirming the lack of biological connection every few years, likely to ensure they still had the leverage. Why, I asked. Why keep me? If they knew I wasn't theirs when I was 5, why raise me? Why pay for the braces and the piano lessons? Elena pulled up a financial statement. This was the smoking gun. Because you were profitable, she said. She pointed to a transaction record from St. Jude's Hospital, dated late 2001, shortly after that first DNA test. It was a settlement payment, labeled Administrative Resolution. The amount was $25,000. They threatened the hospital. Elena surmised. They found out you weren't theirs. They went to the administration, and they threatened to go public with the mix-up. The hospital paid them to keep quiet. They took the hush money, but they didn't give me back. I said, no. Elena said, because if they gave you back, the payments stop. And if they gave you back, they would have to admit they lost their own child. Keeping you allowed them to play the victim to the hospital and get paid. While maintaining the facade of a perfect family to the neighbors, it got worse. Elena's forensic accountant had been digging into my credit history. The cost summary binder Dale had given me was a list of what they spent on me, but he had conveniently left out what they took from me. We found 3 credit cards opened in your name when you were 18. Elena said, they were maxed out and then paid off with minimum payments from a joint account controlled by Dale. They used your credit score to leverage loans for their rental properties. There were utility bills for apartments I never lived in. There was a car loan for a vehicle I never drove. They had been using my identity as a financial accessory for a decade. Technically, because I was their daughter and living under their roof for some of that time. They could argue it was familial assistance, but combined with the coerced release form, it was fraud. It is legal enough to hide behind family, Elena said, her voice disgusted. But it is dirty enough to ruin you if we don't freeze it now. Then the witness statements started coming in. Elena's investigator had contacted the 80 people who were in that kitchen. Most of them hung up. They were loyal to the Smiths, or they just didn't want to get involved. But a few people talked. My cousin Sarah sent an email. She was the one who had whispered my name like a warning. I'm sorry. She wrote, Uncle Dale made us come. He called us a week before and told us he had devastating news and needed the family to stand witness. He told us not to speak to you. He said you were unstable. He said you might get violent. Another neighbor, a man named Mr. Henderson who lived 3 doors down, gave a recorded statement to the investigator. He was rehearsing. "Mr. Henderson said on the tape, "I got there early because I brought the ice." Dale was standing in the living room practicing his speech. He was saying, "We raised someone else's child," over and over again, trying to get the tone right. He told the kid with the phone, my nephew, to make sure he got a clear shot of your face when he handed you the papers. He said, "Record it in case she gets dramatic. We need proof she saw the document. It was a production, a stage play." Every beat of my humiliation had been choreographed to ensure that when I signed that paper, it would look like I did it willingly. They wanted 80 witnesses to testify that I wasn't coerced, that I was just a disappointed daughter accepting the truth. But the final piece of the puzzle came from the Whitakers. I hadn't spoken to them since the coffee shop, but I had given their lawyer permission to share information with Elena. They sent over a box of files their private investigator had compiled over the years. There was a timeline of the night I was born. October 4th, 1996. The Whitakers' investigator had flagged a nurse who was on duty that night. Her name was Nurse Vance, no relation to my attorney. She had been the head nurse in the nursery during the shift change. Her name appeared in the Smiths' financial records. 2. Elena found it deep in the bank statements from 1997. A personal check from Dale Smith to M. Vance. For $500. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was a connection. Why was my father writing a check to a maternity ward nurse 6 months after I was born? We put the pieces together on the whiteboard in Elena's office. The check, the hush money from the hospital, the multiple DNA tests, the trust fund fraud. They knew, I said, staring at the board. They knew the night I was born, or soon after. "It's possible they knew the switch happened," Elena said slowly. "It's possible they realized they had the wrong baby. But for some reason, maybe Marin's health issues were visible early on. Maybe they just didn't want a sick child they decided to keep you. And then they paid the nurse to keep quiet. And then they extorted the hospital. And then they spent 30 years resenting me for the crime they committed. Biology was the weapon. I realized they used the DNA result as the ultimate insult, the thing that would hurt me the most. But the motive wasn't biology. The motive wasn't love or grief or loss. The motive was money, plus control. They kept me because I was cheaper than a sick child. They kept me because I was a tax deduction. They kept me because they could leverage my identity. And when the big payout, the trust fund, finally arrived, they decided to cash out their investment and discard the asset. I looked at the cost summary binder sitting on Elena's desk. I had carried it with me everywhere. They audited me. I said, they wrote down every dollar I cost them. I picked up the binder. Now I know why. I said, they weren't tracking expenses. They were calculating their overhead. I was a business expense. Elena looked at me. Her expression was grim. "We have enough," she said. "We have fraud. We have coercion. We have identity theft. And we have the trust interference." She picked up her phone. "Do you want to send a letter?" she asked. "Or do you want to file?" I thought about the 80 people in the kitchen. I thought about the camera phone pointing at my face. I thought about the 1 hour they gave me to pack my life. "I don't want to send a letter." I said, "I want to serve them, and I want to do it when they are standing on a stage." Revenge does not always look like a slashed tire or a burning house. Sometimes, revenge looks like a credit freeze. It looks like a password change. It looks like two-factor authentication on an account that someone else used to treat as their personal piggy bank. For the first 48 hours after I left Elena's office, I did not sleep. I sat in front of my laptop in my half-unpacked apartment. Systematically locking the doors to my life, I contacted the 3 major credit bureaus. I placed a fraud alert on my Social Security number. I scrolled through years of digital history, identifying every login, every recovery email, and every security question that Dale or Corinne might know the answer to. They knew the name of my first pet. They knew the street I grew up on. They knew my mother's maiden name. These were not just biographical facts. They were keys they had used to unlock my financial identity whenever they needed a bridge loan for a rental property or a new lease on a sedan. I changed them all. I changed the answers to lies that only I would remember. My mother's maiden name was no longer Miller, it was Audit. My first pet was not Buster, it was Justice. With every click of the mouse, with every confirmation email that arrived in my secure inbox, I felt the walls of my fortress going up. Dale had spent 30 years building a cage for me, but he had forgotten that I had the blueprints. I knew how he operated. I knew he relied on my passivity. He relied on the fact that I was the good daughter, the rule follower who would never make a fuss. He thought he was playing chess against a pawn. He did not realize the pawn had made it to the other side of the board and become a queen. While I was locking the doors, Elena Vance was sharpening the knives. She filed a formal petition for a forensic accounting of the trust fund. It was a sterile, bureaucratic request on paper, but in reality, it was a declaration of war. It forced Briarwell Fiduciary to freeze all activity related to the account, which Avery Kincaid executed with the precision of a diamond cutter. Avery sent official notices to the address on file, my new secure address, and copied Dale's legal team, ensuring they knew that every attempt they had made to reroute correspondence had been documented, flagged, and added to the evidence pile. We also initiated claims regarding the identity misuse. Elena did not hold back. She drafted affidavits detailing the credit cards opened in my name when I was 18. The utility bills for apartments I had never set foot in, and the car loans that appeared on my credit report like ghosts. We did not call it family borrowing, we called it what it was. Third-degree felony identity theft. Dale and Corinne realized quickly that I was not fading away. They realized that the 60-minute deadline they had given me was not the end of the story, but the beginning of the sequel. So, they tried to get ahead of the narrative. They went to the one place they still had influence, the court of public opinion. I heard the whispers from my cousin Sarah, who was still straddling the fence between loyalty to the family patriarch and horror at what she had witnessed in the kitchen. "They are telling people you are sick," Sarah texted me late one night. "Aunt Corinne told the prayer circle that the DNA news caused you to have a psychotic break. She said you are imagining conspiracies. She said you are unstable, and that they are trying to get you help, but you ran away." I stared at the phone. It was a smart play. If they could paint me as the hysterical, mentally fragile daughter who couldn't handle the truth, then any legal action I took would look like the lashings out of a crazy person. If I sued them, it was just Peyton being dramatic. If I accused them of fraud, it was Peyton's paranoia. They were poisoning the jury pool before I even stepped into the courtroom. I did not text Sarah back. I did not post a rebuttal on social media. I did not call my aunts and uncles to defend my sanity. I stayed quiet. I let them talk. I let them spin their web of concern and pity, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that the louder they got, the more desperate they looked, and I knew that silence, when wielded correctly, is louder than any scream. Privately, I was gathering the most powerful weapon in the world. It wasn't a gun. It wasn't a bomb. It was a timeline. I organized the evidence Elena and Avery had uncovered into a single, cohesive narrative. I had the private investigator's invoice from 2001. I had the cashed check to the nurse. I had the administrative resolution payment from the hospital. I had the forged change of address form. I printed them out. I labeled them Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. I placed them in clear plastic sleeves. I was building a binder of my own, but mine wasn't a list of costs. Mine was a list of crimes. Then, we got the opening we were waiting for. Dale was being honored. It was the annual gala for the Suburban Business Alliance, a black-tie dinner held at the country club where Dale had been a member for 20 years. He was receiving the Pillar of the Community award. The citation praised his decades of service, his integrity, and his unwavering commitment to family values. It was grotesque. It was perfect. We learned through Elena's network that Dale planned to use his acceptance speech to address the recent tragedy in his family. He was going to stand on that stage, in front of 300 of the city's most influential people, and weep crocodile tears about his lost, troubled daughter. He was going to use the stage to cement the narrative that he was the victim of a biological mix-up and a wayward child. He is walking into a trap, Elena said, tapping her pen on the desk. He thinks he is going to control the room. He thinks you are hiding in your apartment, crying over a bottle of wine. He thinks I'm scared, I said. Are you? Elena asked. I pictured that kitchen again, 80 faces, 80 verdicts. I thought about the way my father looked at me when he handed me the bill for my life. No, I said. I'm not scared. I'm ready to audit him. The night of the gala. I did not wear the gym clothes I had left the house in. I bought a new dress. It was navy blue, tailored, and sharp as a razor blade. It looked like armor. I pulled my hair back. I put on heels that clicked against the floor with a sound like a gavel striking a block. I did not go alone. Elena Vance walked on my right. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a slim leather portfolio. On my left walked a process server named Mike, a man who looked like a linebacker but moved like a ghost. And behind us, arriving in a separate car but walking in sync, were Victor and Leona Whitaker. We did not make a scene at the entrance. We had tickets. The Whitakers had bought a table near the front the moment they heard about the event. We walked into the ballroom just as the appetizers were being cleared. The room was loud with the hum of polite conversation and clinking silverware. When I walked in, the air in the room changed. It rippled outward from the door as people recognized me. Heads turned, forks paused halfway to mouths. This was the unstable daughter. This was the girl who had supposedly had a psychotic break. But I did not look psychotic. I looked calm. I looked dangerous. I saw Corinne first. She was sitting at the head table, wearing a silver gown, looking anxious. When she saw me, she grabbed Dale's arm. Dale looked up. He was smiling. He was shaking hands with the mayor. When he saw me, the smile didn't just fade. It curdled. He went pale, his eyes darting to the security guards by the exit. But he couldn't call security. I wasn't causing a disturbance. I was just walking to a table. We sat down. The Whitakers sat with us. The sight of them, the wealthy, powerful Victor and Leona Whitaker sitting next to the disowned daughter, sent a shockwave through the room. People whispered. They knew who the Whitakers were. They knew their reputation. Their presence validated me in a way 1,000 affidavits never could. It said, "She is not crazy. She is backed." Dale had to go up to the podium. He had no choice. The announcer called his name. Our honoree, Mr. Dale Smith. Applause scattered through the room. Polite but hesitant. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Dale walked to the stage. He looked sweaty. He adjusted the microphone, his hands shaking visibly. He cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said. His voice cracked. "Thank you all. Family. Family is the most important thing to me." He looked at me. He couldn't help it. I was sitting directly in his line of sight, staring at him with a face made of stone. "We have been through a lot recently," he stammered, abandoning his prepared speech about the troubled daughter. "We have faced unexpected challenges." He was faltering. The smooth, confident patriarch was gone. In his place was a man watching his lies dissolve in real time. I nodded to Mike, the process server. Mike stood up. He didn't run. He walked up the aisle toward the stage. He didn't look aggressive. He looked like a staff member delivering a message. He reached the edge of the stage just as Dale paused for a breath. "Dale Smith," Mike said. His voice was not amplified, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it carried to the back row. Dale froze. "Not now," he hissed, leaning away from the microphone. "Get away from me." "You are served," Mike said simply. He placed a thick envelope on the podium. Right next to Dale's award plaque, it wasn't a discreet envelope. It was a bright yellow legal packet, unmistakable. "This is a notice of a civil suit regarding trust fraud, identity theft, and custodial interference," Mike said, reciting the required declaration. Dale snapped. He grabbed the envelope and threw it off the podium. Papers scattered across the front row of tables. "This is harassment," Dale shouted, his voice booming through the speakers, distorted and ugly. She is lying. She is a thief. We took her in. We paid for her. She owes us. The room gasped. This wasn't the grieving father. This was the man with the spreadsheet. This was the man who saw love as a ledger. She is nothing. Dale screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is a 0% match. She is a bad investment. He stopped. The echo of his words, bad investment, rang through the hall. He looked around. He saw the horrified faces of the mayor, the Rotary Club president, the neighbors he had lied to. He saw Corinne burying her face in her hands. He saw the cell phones raised, recording not a heartwarming speech, but a meltdown. I stood up slowly. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a drink. I just looked at him. I am not an investment, Dale, I said. I didn't need a microphone. I am the auditor. I turned to Victor and Leona. They stood up with me. We turned our backs on the stage. We turned our backs on the man unraveling under the spotlight, and we walked out of the ballroom together, leaving him alone with his award and the scattered yellow papers that proved he was finally, permanently, bankrupt. The mediation room was soundproof, which was fortunate, because the silence inside was loud enough to shatter glass. It was a sterile space with gray carpet, a long oval table made of blonde wood, and a wall of windows overlooking the parking lot. There was no audience today. There were no neighbors, no church choir members, no cell phone cameras. There was just the law. On one side of the table sat Dale and Corinne. They looked diminished. Without the backdrop of their kitchen or the stage of the country club, they were just two middle-aged people in ill-fitting suits, looking tired and cornered. Their attorney, a man named Mr. Gorski, who looked like he regretted taking the case, shuffled papers nervously. On the other side sat me. To my right was Elena Vance, my shark of an attorney. To my left was Avery Kincaid, the trust officer who had become my shield. We did not shuffle papers. We had our binders stacked in a neat, terrifying pile. We were not there to argue. We were there to finish the audit. The mediator, a retired judge with a no-nonsense haircut, opened the proceedings. She looked at Dale's side first. Mr. Gorski cleared his throat. He started with the narrative I expected. He talked about the shock of the DNA results. He talked about the emotional toll on my parents. And then, he played their only card. He pulled out a copy of the ledger, the same cost summary Dale had handed me on my birthday. My clients have incurred significant financial burdens over the last 30 years, Gorski said, trying to sound authoritative. They raised a child that was not theirs. They provided food, shelter, education, and medical care. While they acknowledge the existence of the trust, they believe they are entitled to a reimbursement for these costs. They view the trust as a form of restitution for the fraud committed against them by the hospital. He slid the spreadsheet across the table. It was an attempt to frame love as damages. It was an attempt to say that parenting is a billable service, and since the contract was void, they wanted their back pay. I looked at the ledger. I didn't flinch. Elena Vance leaned forward. She didn't touch the spreadsheet. She just smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. That is an interesting argument, Elena said. The idea that the Smiths were unwitting victims who generously supported a stranger. However, that narrative relies on one key fact that they did not know. Elena opened our binder. She pulled out Exhibit C, the bank record from 2001. We have here a record of a settlement payment from St. Jude's Hospital to Dale and Corinne Smith, Elena said. Dated October of 2001. The amount is $25,000. The memo line reads, Administrative Resolution. Dale went pale. Corinne looked away, staring at the gray carpet. If they were surprised by the DNA results 6 weeks ago, Elena continued, her voice cool and level, then why were they accepting hush money from the hospital 25 years ago? They knew Peyton was not their biological daughter. They threatened the hospital. They took the cash, and they kept the child, not out of charity, but because keeping her was the only way to keep the money. Elena flipped the page. And regarding the financial burden, she said, we have conducted a forensic accounting of Peyton's credit history. We found 3 credit cards opened in her name when she turned 18. The statements show charges for lumber, drywall, and contractors' materials used for Mr. Smith's rental properties. That is not parenting. That is identity theft. If you want to talk about reimbursement, we have calculated the interest on those fraudulent loans, as well as the damage to my client's credit score. Dale's lawyer looked at the documents. He looked at Dale. He closed his folder. He knew the financial burden argument was dead in the water. Then Avery Kincaid spoke up. "Let us discuss the trust," Avery said, "because that is the real issue here." Avery placed the forged change of address form on the table. This request to reroute trust correspondence was received 3 weeks before Peyton's 30th birthday, Avery said. It was signed with a forgery. It was verified via a burner phone. The IP address used to access the online portal matches the Wi-Fi network at the Smith residence. Avery looked directly at Dale. "This establishes intent," Avery said. "You were not trying to recoup costs. You were attempting to intercept access credentials for an account holding over $4 million. You timed the birthday party and the forced signature on the release form to coincide exactly with the vesting date. You were trying to bully her into waiving her rights before she knew she had any rights to waive." The room was silent. The weight of the evidence was crushing. It wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a criminal timeline. I looked at Dale. I wanted to see if he had any fight left. I wanted to see if the pillar of the community had one more speech in him. He looked up at me. His eyes were red. He looked pathetic. "We took care of you," he whispered. "We gave you a room. We gave you a home." "You gave me a line item," I said. My voice was steady. "You treated me like an employee you couldn't fire until the contract was up. And the moment the money appeared, you tried to liquidate me." That was the most devastating fact the forensic accounting had revealed. They didn't treat me like a stranger for 30 years. They treated me like a daughter coldly. Yes, but a daughter right up until the moment I became worth more as a victim. The humiliation wasn't emotional. It was a business decision. They tried to break me psychologically so I wouldn't have the strength to fight for the money legally. Elena played the final card. She placed a flash drive on the table. "We have witness statements from 12 people who attended the party," Elena said. "We also have the video file recorded by your neighbor's nephew. It clearly shows Mr. Smith screaming at Peyton, setting a 60-minute deadline, and physically blocking her exit while demanding a signature. Under the law, that is coercion. Even if she had signed that release, this video would void it in 10 seconds. The mediator looked at the video thumbnail. She looked at Dale. "Mr. Gorski," the mediator said, "I suggest you advise your clients to settle. If this goes to trial, given the evidence of fraud, forgery, and identity theft, I will be referring this to the district attorney." Dale slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him like air leaving a balloon. He realized he wasn't going to get the trust money. He wasn't going to get reimbursement. He was dangerously close to going to prison. The settlement was drafted within the hour. The terms were absolute. Dale and Corinne signed a document admitting that I was the sole beneficiary of the trust. They agreed to indemnify me for all credit card fraud. They agreed to a permanent restraining order. They would never contact me again. They would never speak my name in public again. I watched them sign. Dale's hand shook as he held the pen. It was the same pen he had tried to force on me in the kitchen. Now, he was using it to sign away his control. When it was done, they stood up. They didn't look at me. They walked out of the room, looking gray and old. They were still wealthy people. They had their rental properties and their savings, but they were bankrupt in every way that mattered. Their reputation was ruined. Their daughter was gone, and the money they had spent 30 years coveting was sitting securely in my name. I stayed in the chair for a moment. I felt light, not happy, exactly, but light. The weight of the binder was gone. The weight of the debt was gone. "It is finished," Elena said, closing her file. "Yes," I said. "It is." I walked out of the building into the bright, sharp sunlight. Victor and Leona Whitaker were waiting by the curb. They hadn't come into the mediation. They knew this was a battle I had to fight myself, but they were there to see the aftermath. When they saw me, Leona took a step forward. She looked hopeful. "Is it over?" she asked. "It is over," I said. Victor let out a long breath. "We are so glad. Peyton, we have the car. We can go to the estate. We can start." I looked at them. They were good people. They had fought for me. They had provided the evidence that saved me. They wanted so badly to be my parents. They wanted to take me home and put me in the guest house and pretend that the last 30 years hadn't happened. They wanted to love me enough to make up for Marin. But I wasn't Marin. And I wasn't the Peyton they had imagined in their grief. I shook my head gently. "I can't go to the estate," I said. Leona's face fell. "Oh, but the guest house. It is ready." "I know," I said, "and I appreciate it. I really do. But I just spent 30 years living in a house where I was playing a role. I can't step into another one." I looked at them, trying to convey all the gratitude and boundaries I felt at the same time. "I would like to get to know you," I said. "Slowly, as friends, maybe as family, eventually, but I am 30 years old. I have to be my own person. I can't be a replacement daughter. I have to be Peyton." Victor looked at me. He studied my face, the face that looked so much like his dead daughter's. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He nodded. "We understand," Victor said. He put a hand on Leona's shoulder. "We respect that. We just want you in our lives, in whatever capacity you choose." "Dinner," I said. "Next week? At a restaurant? My treat?" Leona smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. "Dinner sounds wonderful." I watched them drive away. Then I walked to my own car. It was a used sedan with a dent in the bumper, but it was mine. I got in and drove home. I walked up the stairs to my apartment. It was still half unpacked, but it looked different to me now. It didn't look like a place to hide. It looked like a starting line. I locked the door behind me, a deadbolt I had installed myself. The silence in the apartment wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was the silence of a space that no one could invade without my permission. I walked to the kitchen counter. The bottle of wine was still there. The $40 Cabernet I had bought for the birthday party. The bottle I had called the timestamp of my life breaking. I looked at it. For weeks. I had been afraid to touch it. I had given it so much power. I had made it a symbol of my foolish hope and my parents' betrayal. I reached into the drawer and found a corkscrew. I twisted it into the cork. The sound was satisfying, a soft crunch, a squeak, and then the pop as the seal broke. I poured a glass. The wine was dark red, almost purple. I held it up to the light. I took a sip. I expected it to taste like ash. I expected it to taste like grief. I expected it to bring back the smell of the garage and the feeling of the 80 people staring at me. But it didn't. It tasted like grapes. It tasted like oak. It tasted like wine. It was just a beverage. It was just an object. It held no power over me. The memory was there. But the sting was gone. I had audited the trauma, and I had closed the account. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights of Columbus. I had $4 million in the bank. I had a new last name if I wanted it. I had a biological family who wanted to know me. I had a career. But mostly, I had myself. "Happy birthday, Peyton," I whispered to the empty room. I took another sip of wine. It was good. And for the first time in 30 years, the aftertaste wasn't bitter. Thank you so much for listening to Peyton's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please comment down below with your country or city so we can see how far this story has traveled. And share your thoughts on whether you think Peyton made the right choice with the Whitakers. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Jane Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.